So on behalf of NQGI Tropics, I'd like to welcome you to the second session in our Paddock to Reef conversation series. My name's Rob Hunt. I'm the Sustainable Ag Program Manager at NQGI Tropics. The purpose of these conversations is to raise awareness and understanding of the Paddock to Reef monitoring, modelling and reporting program by presenting locally relevant information on the program and its application in the Burdekin region. The series kicked off last month with an overview of the Paddock to Reef program by Carl Mitchell from the Department of Environment and Science. A recording of that presentation can be found on the NQGI Tropics website, along with a copy of the slides and a 4-page summary document. Similarly, a recording of today's session will also appear on that page in the very near future, along with a summary and a copy of the slides. Today's session is intended to cover the Paddock to Reef management practice adoption questions. The answers to these questions help to establish progress towards the reef water quality targets and make a significant contribution to the Reef Water Quality Report Card. Today's presenter is Adam Northey, who's the coordinator of the Paddock to Reef Management Practice Adoption Team in the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. Adam's going to give a little history on the development of the questions, what information they're trying to gather, and how and why they've changed over time, and what changes are likely to occur in the future. So a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, we have a longer booking on our Zoom account today, so we don't run out of time like last month, and we do apologise for that. That also makes sure we've got plenty of time for questions during and after the presentation. And I guess the key to all this is it's not just a presentation, it's a conversation. So we're happy for you to put your hand up, pop a comment in the chat, or raise your hand using the raise hand icon. And my role as facilitator is to incorporate those questions and answers into the conversation. But please, we do ask that you raise your hand, use the raise hand logo, or pop it in the chat rather than just speaking over the presenter. I'll facilitate that conversation to keep things on time and on topic. I do ask that all participants remain respectful of one another. Sometimes these topics can get a little bit emotive, so just if we keep the conversation respectful, I'm sure we'll all get a lot more out of it. A reminder also that there's broader information about the Paddock to Reef program available, both in the earlier presentation that we've already put up on our website, but you can also visit the Reef Plan website or just Google Paddock to Reef and you'll come up with that website so you can do some more background reading. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'll hand you over to Adam.
All right, thanks, Rob. I'll share my screen. Hopefully that's all working. So yeah, thanks, Rob. Adam Northey. So what I'm going to do today is talk about the management practice adoption program part of Paddock to Reef, and hopefully give a bit of context about why it currently looks like it does, and why we ask the things we ask, and why we need to know the things we do, and then we can touch on people may be aware that the program's actually under review at the moment. A consultancy company called Alluvium have been contracted by the Queensland and Australian government to review the targets. So different targets means the program will undertake fairly significant evolution in the coming 6 to 12 months. Okay. So for our program, we've got two main roles. Okay, we've got the role of monitoring the adoption of improved land management practices and systems and reporting on that land management target. And the second part of our role is about providing information to the modelling teams about these management changes so that they can model the impact of these changes, okay? And then some secondary things about providing feedback to the investors, so the Queensland, Australian government, GBRF, and also, making ourselves available back to you guys who are delivering on the ground about, helping you understand how the program works and how to get the best out of the program. Oh, and so this is the management practice target that we report on now. So 90% adoption of 90% of land in priority areas under grazing, horticulture, banana, sugarcane, and other broad acre cropping are managed using best management practice systems for water quality outcomes. So that's the one that we currently report on. So that's the one we have carriage of. So Rob mentioned that there is that big, broader Paddock to Reef program, and Carl spoke about this last week, but what I just want to show is where we sit in this. So this is the conceptual diagram that's in the overview documentation around it. So essentially when I look at this, we have at this paddock scale here, we have a paddock monitoring and a modeling program. So at this scale here, what we're trying to work out is if you do a certain practice, what is the likely impacts of that practice in terms of sediment loss, nutrient loss, that sort of stuff. Where we fit in is we go, okay, if these practices are happening here, so the practice scale modeling and monitoring stuff, they're saying if these particular practices are happening here, how much of those practices currently in the landscape, and of those, how many of those are changing? So once we drop out of the paddock area, we get into the catchment area. So, the catchment dynamics, not all sediment or nutrient moves all the way through the catchment. Some's picked up in wetlands or deposited on the banks, or, on the floor, or trapped behind dams and that sort of stuff. And then the marine side is about, once these nutrients and pesticides and sediments get out into the marine environment, what's their impact? So where do they go in the currents, and what's the impact on corals and seagrasses and that sort of stuff. So where I'm very much in this paddock side of things, so the catchment marine side. For other people, and Carl covered that, and there's plenty of information on the Paddock Reef Plan website. So really going to dive deep into these land management targets. So the first time we've seen a land management target under Reef Plan, so Reef Plan's been around since 2003, I think. So the initial couple of reef plans were about, let's work out what's impacting on the reef, what's its ultimate state, that sort of stuff. But in 2009, the first of the reef water quality protection plans, or Reef Plan, or Reef WQIP, it's got a few different names, came in with a land management target. And this target here was about 80% of landholders in agricultural enterprises, you can read it there, will adopt improved soil nutrient and chemical management practices. So this is the first time that there was recognition that getting improvement in the way that the country's farmed and managed and that sort of stuff is going to help us improve the water quality on the reef. So back then, reporting was about tracking this number, 80% of landholders. So we didn't need to know where the people were. We didn't need to know really how they were managing. We just needed to know they were getting better. So it was an engagement target. And it was really focused on getting new people in. So back then, I should have added, so I've been in this program now with DAF for about 7.5 years, but the previous 3 years before that, I was with the Fitzroy Basin Association. So I've sort of been in the reef space now for about 10 years. So I remember back in these days when we were reporting against these targets, and it was very much an engagement target. We reported, we did this, and we spent this money. So really, there was a few issues with this. There's a very scattergun approach. It was just whoever wanted to work with us, we worked with. We didn't really have a way of accounting for double count, of accounting for ensuring we weren't double counting savings. So often we were saying, oh yes, we worked with this farmer, but we worked with him already last year and the year before and that sort of stuff. So it wasn't a very good system. And this is what the reporting looked like. So we would have, project one, landholder one, because we tried to track landholders a little bit back then. Industry, obviously sugar, talking about here. We've got an area. We asked what catchment they were in, so that was provided by whoever was reporting, how much reef rescue money was going in, and a bit of a description. So this was literally what reporting was from 2009 to 2013. In 2013, so each of these reef water quality protection plans have a 5-year life cycle. So they get set in for 5 years. We go, this is the target we're going to work on for 5 years. And then at the end of that cycle, these targets get reviewed and renewed, and we end up with a new, we have a chance to relook at things, and we re-gauge and move forward with the target. So in 2013, these targets were updated. So for the land management one, we now have a target that says, and we'll go through this, it says 90%. So now we have an area that we need to hit of sugarcane, horticulture, cropping, and grazing lands are managed using best management practice systems. So we've now, at this point, we had to put this line and say, look, we need people to jump over this line. Before it was about engagement. We just wanted people to come and work with us. Now it's about, well, what we want people to get over this line. So big shift from air, or a shift to area. So it was about, because that's at 90% of lands. So the shift to area, no longer about counting people, and a need to achieve best management practices. So there was when this came up, there was two things that we needed to know as people responsible reporting against this. So we need to know where we are in this 90%. Are we close? Are we far away? We also need to know, well, there was around this best management practice systems, what is a best management practice system, and are people doing that? Are people managing their farms using that? So this is where the water quality risk frameworks first started in. So this is the 2013 one, the first of the water quality risk frameworks. So this was back then, we had to define what best practice was. So the framework was about best practice. So we now have this line in the sand, and we needed growers to get to this. This is where we also started with benchmarks. So we needed to know, how far away from that 90% are we? So we needed to know approximately how farms are managed in the region. So we went through a process where we worked with local groups, and they were surveying people, and we did a bit of surveying, a bit of expert advice from a few different people. We talked to, we tried to engage as many people as we could about trying to work out how farms in a particular region are managed. So this is the 2013 or 14 benchmark for sugarcane in the Burdekin. And that meant a big shift in the way we reported. So if we remember before, the reporting was about, which was just done by, so in the reef rescue days, it was the money came via the NRM groups. So the NRM groups would say, okay, well, we worked with landholder one on project ID, whatever, and we spent this amount of money. So this is what it was done. So all the reporting that was done from 2009 to 13 was a big spreadsheet, and extension officers and the grants, the people on the ground probably weren't really overly involved in it, or at least in my experience here, they weren't involved in it. It was something that we did in office. When we went to the new target, we needed to engage people on the ground a bit more. So we needed to go to spatial reporting, because there was that area, because it says land, so we need to know the hectares. We also needed to make sure that we weren't double counting people. So we didn't want to say, oh, there's 200 hectares here, another 200, another 200, another 200, and all being the same 200. So there was this need to go to a spatial reporting, and the need to report against those water quality risk frameworks. So, where in this continuum of best practice is this farm currently, and where are they moving to, so that we can track that adoption to, or that movement to 90% of area going to best practice. So spatial reporting, and then before and after questions. So this is the first time we started seeing them. Now I'm going to sort of follow a couple of questions through. I'm going to follow the nutrient questions through as it's evolved over time through the different iterations of Reef Plan. So in 2013, these were the nutrient questions. And if you notice that question 6 there, that's the one about N rate, okay? So we were like, how are you calculating fertilizer rate? And if we zoom in a bit more on this, we can look at some of the issues that this had. So we look at 6.2 here. we were saying, and these are written that 1 is the higher risk and 5 was the lower risk. So what we were saying here was that there is a high risk practice, and it always had a poor water quality outcome, which we now know isn't true. And an example here is, if you're 60 tonne using 190 or you're 120 tonne using 190, they're both treated the same under this, and very different outcomes there in terms of how much surplus nitrogen there is in the system. Now, the reason that we use this is at the time the advice we were given by people on the ground was that, we just couldn't get the rate and yield there. People didn't trust us, for starters. A lot of people didn't actually know. They were given a rate by an advisor or, whoever they were given a rate by, and they knew it was this amount of product that they had to put on. They didn't actually know how much nitrogen was in that. So about this time, maybe 2013, 14, somewhere around there, NQ Dry Tropics were actually one of the first groups that started monitoring rate, N rate. So they had a bit of a process where they were going, you're putting on this product at this sort of rate, and converted it to N and started giving us some information about that. And what we found was there was really no correlation between actual N rate and this year. So we had people that said, yeah, look, I'm adjusting for my own yield potential, but we're applying well in excess, or they said, yes, I'm at this 6.2, so aiming to achieve district yield potential, but applying much lower rates than what would indicated that. So it became really apparent in this year where we were using proxy question to try and work out a rate that it wasn't working for us. 2017 rolls around and we get a new water quality improvement plan. Okay, so a new Reef plan, or a slight name change now to water quality improvement plan. That target pretty much stayed the same. We had 90% adoption of best practice kind of thing. It got a few wordsmithing things for water quality outcome was added in there. The big thing that happened was that each catchment now has a target. Okay, and this is where we have been working in for the last few years. So you'll notice that 22, it's 22 now, so it's up for review. That's this process going through there. But where we're at now is that we're asking this, that we're underneath this target, and that's what I'm going to talk a bit more about now, and then at the end we'll talk about where to from there. So there was a little bit of refinement of the risk frameworks, and a resetting of the benchmarks. So we did quite a lot of work to try and reset our benchmarks here. So we had quite a lot of our own data. So if we look here about P2R projects, so we had about 40,000 or 41,000 hectares of projects reported. So that means we had these assessments of the farm management against the Reef framework. SRA added some of our questions into one of their grower surveys that year. We got some aggregated data from the BMP programs, which is quite a lot there. And when I say aggregated from BMP program, what we had was, in the Burdekin or the Horton area, there is roughly 20% of growers doing X. So we didn't actually get the BMP, assessments for any of that sort of stuff, which we didn't want. We just wanted, there's X amount doing this and X amount doing that. Some grower surveys, quite a lot of one-on-one grower surveys done by BPS, some compliance data in there as well. And then a lot of, industry expertise about, so we would sit down and say, okay, we're really interested in the in the hectares of fallow that are planted to legume each year. And, there's people in different catchments that have great information on that. Say, oh yeah, look, I think there was this guy and that guy. Yeah, okay, so probably this many hectares kind of thing. So that's how we set the benchmarks here. And I put this up because what's really important here is that we we get an opportunity to, we say we're moving along at this rate, and you know, a lot of the changes about the hectares reported to us through the various programs. But this here is an opportunity to go, okay, well, we know that there's all this stuff has happened that weren't captured underneath, you know, one of the funded programs. Can we capture it using one of these alternative lines of evidence here, and, you know, voluntary change and all that sort of stuff, and capture this voluntary change that we know is happening in the industry. So we end up with a new benchmark. We changed the nutrient questions quite a lot. So I was saying before, with the old questions were just about, you know, how are you applying 6 easy steps? We realized that, well, why don't we just ask about rate and yield? So we added these questions in here about rate and yield, and they've worked really well for us now. So, you know, we've gone from having that proxy question to try and work out a rate and yield sort of thing to now let's just ask for the data. And this has been a massive step forward for us in terms of really being able to understand the amount of nitrogen there is in the pool on a farm and how much is potentially there available for a loss. Now, there are still a few assumptions that sit behind this that limit us a little bit. Now, because the risk framework is really about to what extent you implement the 6 easy steps methodology, the way that those rate and yield questions are used is really about trying to work out to what extent 6 easy steps is put in. So it still has a few limitations, and there is an update coming into the stuff that we do and into projector, which kind of fixes this. It takes it more to how many kilos per ton of cane sort of thing. So, you know, the more kilos of N you put on per ton of cane is a higher risk, and less is that sort of stuff. So we make it much more linear. So that's an update that's coming. Okay. So how does it work? So how do we take information that you guys are collecting on a farm and going and use that to work out, one, how we're progressing against that 90% target, and two, what's been the water quality impact of these things and how we're progressing against that water quality, that target as well. Okay, so there's a water quality target that sits above it saying, you know, we want a X% reduction of DIN in, you know, this catchment next and that catchment sort of thing. So we've got to go through a few things. So the first thing we've got to do is work out what are the current practices that are happening on farm. So when you answer the before questions, that's what that's giving us. And we use that stuff there to feed over to the modelers, and the modelers go, well, what are the current losses on that farm? We then go, well, what are the new practices that are happening? So you've done a practice change, worked with a particular grower, you've got them to change something. So what are the new ones? So that's where the after practices come in. We use that data to also tell the modelers well, this is how it's managed there. And then the difference between the two is the change. So if we've got, you know, before practices of C, after practices are B, the changes are B to C. If the before losses are, you know, whatever, you know, 100, and the after losses are 50, then the savings is 50.
Sorry,
so let's look at
how do you get to that point? Sorry, it's Greg Reserve. Just came on. I'm sorry I'm late. But like you just said, could we go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, going from current practices to new practices, how do you know what the losses were in the old practices?
Okay, so I'm just trying to think where I've got a slide.
It's got to be factual, not just some sort of made up number.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about whether I've got a slide about this. So the losses under the current practices are about, there's a couple of programs that are running. Well, there's lots of science sort of happening that's saying, okay, if these particular practices are done in a particular area, so a particular soil type using particular, soil types, rainfall, all that sort of stuff. What are we measuring in terms of runoff losses, drainage losses, that sort of stuff? So that is then used to feed into the modeling, so the APSIM modeling. And what it then does is say, okay, well, we've run trials here, 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 and here. What are the, let's see if we can use the model to fill in the gaps, because we can't run a trial on every single farm to get some actual losses there.
Well, if these practices have got to come in, well, you've got to be a little more factual than just running models across a whole area. Every little, there's sub areas within areas that'll act differently to 1 kilometre away to 5 kilometres away. So
I've got a slide a bit later on. The model is a physics model. Okay, so there's things that we absolutely know. So we absolutely know how much nitrogen a plant can take up. So and it's really easy. You grow a plant, you cut it off at the ground, you grind it up, and you measure the nitrogen in there.
Yep.
So if we know how much is going in, we know how much is in the plant. The rest of it's got to be somewhere. So, it might be still there, but it just keeps building up, and it's got to go somewhere. And we can measure what's still there. Like, it's pretty easy to measure nitrate in soil as well. So, if we look at this in a pure physics sense, it's got to go somewhere. So, where is it? And if it's not in the plant, it's not in the soil, it's lost. So, and it's lost through 3 pathways. So it's going to be lost through gas, it's going to be lost through drainage, or it's going to be lost through runoff. So, and that's where the model comes in and says, okay, well, we know if you do these particular things, we measure this kind of losses in runoff and this kind of losses in drainage, we can estimate gases. So this is how we come up with, that's the losses. Okay. So we'll go back into analysing the data. So we've gone through this process where we've said, we've answered a whole heap of questions and said, okay, if you're doing this type of trash blanketing, this type of CTF, your row width is this, this, and this. We ask, so if we just look in here about soil management, we're going to have, this is how we're managing soil. And we've, for each of these questions in any of them in soil management, nutrient management, for the response for each question, you get a score, okay? And the score relates to how much influence this particular practice has on the losses of, in this case, soil. So if we look here at 2.1, we're talking about CTF, so compaction across a field, and we're saying it has about 15% influence on losses. So if I'm doing 2.3, I will get a score of 5. So what we can do here is we can run through here and say, I'm doing this, 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 and this, and I get a 22 out of 100. Okay. Now, if I change something, if I move to this particular practice here, all the rest of my practices stay the same, I end up with a new score. Okay. So I've gone from a 22 before, and now I've jumped up to a 62. Sitting in behind this thing here, we have these matrix here, which is saying, okay, if you get a particular score range, we have score ranges for the different levels we have in the modeling. If you get a score between a certain number, you're going to fit into one of these categories, one of these classes in the modeling. So original was 22, which put us into this CP or C partial rating. And then our after, so using the after questions, we got a 62, which then moved us up into this B partial rating. So our practice change, so our practice change for soil management here would have gone from a C partial to a B partial.
So that in the Burdekin with a trash blanket, you're saying will get us up into the B area, but what if it starts letting off methane?
I think we're kind of fairly off topic here. I'm really here to talk about
trash blankets, isn't
it? Yeah, look, we're pretty off topic here. I'm going to keep talking about this stuff. I'm happy if you want to talk about this after. you know, I'm sort of here to talk about the Paddock to Reef program, not about the science around, you know, that sort of stuff, which is outside of my level of expertise. And I'm happy to have a talk to you and try and help you talk to the right people. But you know, at the moment, I'm here to talk about the management practice adoption program inside of Paddock to Reef.
So this probably isn't a growers forum, is it, that can ask questions? You know, this is where the people who get impacted the most to ask the questions while this is happening. You know, I was sent this invite to be on here, so I thought asking questions is a good thing.
Yeah. Look, absolutely ask questions, but I'm keen for you to ask questions about the stuff I'm presenting, not necessarily about the things that I'm not an expert in. Like you're talking about methane. That's not my area of expertise. I'm talking about the water quality risk frameworks and how we use those frameworks to measure practice change to report against a target.
Yeah, but anyway, sounds like we're on a different page here, totally, altogether, between growers and what's coming out here. You know, we're
hey, look, I'm really keen for you to hang around, Greg, and watch the rest of this because it's important. You missed a beginning there, and it's really important to I'm trying to sort of show why we do what we do. Now, these targets are under review at the moment, and we are going to change them quite a lot. And that, you know, the way we do things, we're kind of stuck in a process at the moment. We do this right now. We have to go through this process right now because that's the way that it was set for the 5 years. That 5 years is up and we're moving forward. So everything changes in the next 6 to 12 months about the things that we need to know and the way that all of this kind of works. So you know, you're saying there about trash blanketing. It's I 1,000,000% understand where, and you know, trash blanketing gets brought up quite a lot here in the Burdekin, and I 100% agree with everything people are saying here. You know, you guys are being judged about whether or not you trash blanket it in a low risk area for sediment. I can't see why we worry about it into the future. So, you know, we've got the future looks very different. We know the whole program's matured a lot. So not just, you know, the science and the stuff that we're involved in, but also the delivery and you know, we've got a lot of the pool of people that were delivering projects in the past is much bigger and, you know, much more diverse, and, you know, a lot more technical grunt is into the delivery programs now compared to what it was 10 years ago. So, you know, we've matured a lot, and I think the future is really quite good. You know, I'll show you some of this stuff later, but, you know, what I'm trying to show here is why we're getting the results we're getting. Okay. Where was I? Okay. So when we talk about practice change and when against that target, so against this target here about practice change, what we're looking for is where people have moved from one of these particular bands to the next one. So we absolutely know that there's stuff moving in between there. And, you know, in the future, these are the areas that we're trying to fix. But underneath this current target, it's about practice changes defined as moving from one of these bands to the other one. Okay, so these ones here, these are all practice change. Where they're moving from inside of this, so if they went from a 25 to 29, then that is not counting against this target here. The other thing about this target is it has a definition of best management practice systems. Okay, so under the risk frameworks, that's where you sit in this A and this B category. So, and this A partial category is obviously halfway between the two. So for projects to be counting towards this target of 90% adoption, it's these areas where they're going from outside of this green box to outside this green box to inside this green box. So this practice change here would have counted, this one would have counted, this one wouldn't have counted towards this target. this one wouldn't have counted towards this target either. What these ones here, the impact of these changes is still modeled. So the water quality impact of these changes is still modeled, but they don't count towards this 90% adoption target. And that's where we've seen a little bit of disconnect in the reporting over the last few years, in that we've had a lot of movement in this lower end, and seen, particularly in nutrients, so quite a large reduction in nutrient loads out on the reef, or that we estimate out on the reef. But the practice change, this target hasn't moved a lot, because there's a lot of movement in this lower level here, which has a really good water quality outcome, but they're just not getting into here. So, and hence why this target is being reviewed and abolished, basically. So this is the first part about telling us about the practice change, and are we achieving this best practice as we define in this risk framework. The next part is, are we at the 90% yet? So those benchmarks that I showed up before, what we have is they translate out into an estimation of a percentage of the area underneath each of those bands. And then, if we have a percentage, we can calculate an area there. So then what we're getting these projects come in and they're going, okay, I've gone from a CF to a BF. I've gone from a DF to a, wherever that stops, a CF. So we're getting all of these coming. So across Reef, generally in sugarcane, we're generally getting 1,500 farm blocks, whatever you want to call it. Like sometimes it's whole farm, sometimes an area of farm reported to us each year. Up around the 80 to 100,000 hectares of change each year. We're sort of getting an engagement in the sugarcane industry. So what we do is we add all of those up and we go, okay, there's this here and that one's gone from there and there, and we try and keep the mass balance. So what we then do is, I've got these labels around the wrong way, is we have an estimation of, okay, there was, in the past, in this D, we had 22,500 hectares we thought was in this D full, but because of all the movement, there's been a lot move out of there. So we now got 17. And, this one's changed to 11 and the A's gone up by quite a bit. So, and then we just back calculate back to a percentage. So in this case here, we had in the A and B, so what we would have reported as best practice, it was at 22%. And then, over this particular reporting period and all the changes has moved that up to a 29%. So what we then do is, so that we've run through that for nutrients, we've run through that for soil. We would then do it for nutrients and irrigation and pesticides, so that we can build a picture of how the entire farm is managed. So that gives us a picture of how this farm's managed, because there's quite a lot of interaction between how nutrients move off a paddock dependent on the way that the soil is managed and also irrigation is managed. So if we're seeing, so we need to know how the soil and the irrigation is managed, particularly in relationship to nutrients, about how they're kind of moving off, and also important for herbicides as well. So we combine them all together and that gives us a code. So we would say currently this farm is managed using this type of code. And this code here relates to one of the model runs that has happened. Now, there's been a practice change. So we have an after code. So we got a before and an after code. This then goes off to the modeling teams and they say, okay, and we need to send the polygon as well, because we need to know the soil type that's there, because soil type is really quite important in terms of how, the interaction between the plant and the nutrient, how it moves through the soil profile and all that sort of stuff. It also tells us where in the landscape it is. So, is it right next to a water course, so more likely to end up straight in the water? Is it, close to the coast or far away from the coast? That sort of stuff. So the modeling teams get the polygon area of the farm, and they get before and after practices, and that goes off to the modelling team. So the AppSim modelers will run that. And just a quick slide up here about AppSim. So as I was saying before, it's a physics-based model. Inputs, we have some things that we really know. Whatever's left over is there for losses. Okay, it's a daily model run, and it's run over a 40-year period. Okay, so essentially what AppSim says is if we applied these type of practices on a particular soil type in a particular region, and we ran 40 years ago, what would have been the impact? It's using real rainfall data collected by BOM. It has a set management combinations for each region. So when I say by set management combinations, when we say tillage, the model needs to know what you mean by tillage. So we might say a particular tillage equals ripping to whatever depth, and then a disking to whatever depth that leaves clods at whatever size, and then whatever sort of thing. So we might say tillage equals this many passes with this implement, which has this amount of impact, this implement, this amount of impact. So, and that's different per region. That's set up with local import. And the other thing to mention is with the WQIP being, or this version of the Reef, the Reef Water Quality Improvement Plan, so we're up to the end. This will all be under review as well. So, we need to make sure that when we say tillage in the Burdekin, is the model representing that as accurately as it possibly can? And just a bit more about that physics-based thing. So essentially, their model has inputs. So we have inputs of water and irrigation and pesticide and all that sort of stuff. We have what's taken up by the crop and exported when it's harvested. Everything else that's there is sitting as an output. So we absolutely know that there's stuff tied up in the organic pool and the soil biota in the sitting there still in the field. Some of it's lost through gases. When the water gets waterlogged at a certain amount, it all just converts and floats off as N2. We have these estimations based on observed stuff about runoff and about drainage. So it's very much an input taken up by the crop output. So, and this is really what we're trying to work out is if the inputs are X, the crop takes about this amount. What it can't take up is surplus. And if it's surplus, it's available to be lost. I'll just quickly touch on projector. So what I've been running through at the moment is the Paddock to Reef program. The other thing that we do is we run this Paddock to Reef projector. So the projector is not the Paddock to Reef model. Okay, the model is run by modeling teams they're now all over in DES now. There's a catchment modeler for each region. There's also a Paddock scale modeler for each of the regions as well, and each of the commodities. So I think Brendan Power is the guy that's looking after your sugarcane modeling stuff for the Burdekin. So it's not the model. Now the data is the same data that AppSim ran. Okay, it's the same data, but what it is it's aggregated to an annual average per soil, per climate, per catchment. Okay, so that the AppSim data is 40 years worth of daily data for every farm. Basically, we just roll it up into a big spreadsheet that is annual averages by soil type, catchment, and management. It doesn't represent every soil type in a catchment. Okay, so catchment's going to have, if you look at what's and if we look at the actually described soils in a catchment, I'm not sure what it is in the Burdekin area, but it could be dozens of actually described soils there. We roll it up into into soils that are functionally similar, and it's to keep the size of this data cube down so that it's quick. Now, and there's generally about 5 or 6. And when I say functionally similar, I mean soils that are going to operate in terms of drainage and nutrient availability very similarly. So we're not going to put a sandy soil with a clay soil. They're not going to be together. So your heavier clayer soils all get grouped together. Your lighter sandier soils all get grouped together. So as I was saying, lots of different soil types in there. So projectors looking at what the actual map soil type is in there, and then saying, okay, does that actual map soil type, is it actually in there in the list of soils I have? If yes, happy days. If not, then which is the one that this soil's been mapped to? So we may end up with particular farms where, and you'll see here we have farms that we have mapped a couple of different soil types in here. Now, you know, they could be 2 different soil types for projector, or they could be the same soil type for projector. And we look up the climate, so real rainfall data as measured by Bureau of Meteorology over, you know, depending on the area, you know, 100 years, 50 years, whatever, depending on the gauge. So just quickly go through that. So in projector, you've created a project, you run through the practice change survey. So where I was talking about before, how we measure practice change, we come up with those codes. This is where we are here. So you run through the practice survey. We're given this code. We use that to come up with the code before and after. So the CF, BF, that sort of stuff. We've done the map. We get a soil and a climate from the map. So an example here, you know, lots, and if we've got lots of soils in here, we basically broke a project up into lots of different areas. We combine all those together and we use those things for a lookup table. So down in the bottom here is an example of the data cube, so the big spreadsheet that's sitting in the back. Across the top is these different codes that we use the surveys to come up with. So we've got those different codes along the side here. These are, so this is telling me a particular region, a particular soil, a particular climate, and then it's telling me the constituents, so in terms of soil, nutrient, pesticide here. So when we use the information we get from the surveys, we can pick one of these along the top, and then the information from the map, we pick one of these along the side, and we triangulate, and we go, okay, before we estimate that they're losing this amount here. And then when we do it again for an after, and we go, okay, after, it might have moved to one of these other ones here. So we thought before we were losing 2.63 per hectare. We've done whatever, we've moved to an after, which is now 2.25 per hectare. So the saving there would be 0.39 or something like that. Anyways, saving there. So, and what's kind of important here is it's about the saving. So the absolute number is less important than the saving. So remember what we're trying to do is measure a saving, not an absolute load coming out of this. So it's the relativity between these two numbers is far more important than the actual number itself. Again, just a little bit of difference between projector and Paddock to Reef. So data annual averages in projector, it's aggregated at catchment level. That doesn't happen in Paddock to Reef. Overlapping projects, so projector doesn't, you can draw the same project on the same block of land, you know, as many times as until you get sick of it, and it'll just keep counting it. So you can say we're going from whatever nutrient to whatever nutrient, and you're getting, you know, whatever 100 kilo saving each time. You just keep going over and over and over there. You'll get as many as you want. It doesn't see overlap. In Paddock to Reef, it's really important for us that we identify and we fix that overlap up. So wherever there's overlapping projects, we only count that area once. projector also can't account for areas that were done 2 or 3 years ago. So, and often, you know, two different groups might work in there, and a change may get double counted. It used to be quite an issue a few years ago. It's probably a little bit less now, but so if 2 years ago a practice change happened on a farm, and you know we went, okay, yep, that however much is now gone to best practice, we've modeled the impact of that. If that farm turns up again this year in the data reported, we identify it and say, well, that can't have happened. Projected results are unverified, and what I mean by unverified is that because it's a very automated process, sometimes things happen in there that you go, well, that doesn't really make sense. So an example is, you know, a 20 kilo reduction in N rate will sometimes not generate a saving in projector. We all know that. We all hate that it does that, and you know, we're going to fix that. In Paddock to Reef, we'll find that. So we look at everything and we go, oh, hang on, this has gone a 20 kilo reduction and it hasn't generated a saving. Well, we just manually intervene and we make sure it generates a saving. So we push it from one class to the next and we make sure that that happens. And, you know, so projector takes minutes to reduce a result, and we take a year because we need that year to look at all of these little bits and pieces, look at every single project. We need to understand, like, you know, it doesn't make sense when this happens. You know, we've got a whole heap of practice changes in a catchment around this particular thing. Is what the catchment load reduction, does that actually make sense? So there's a lot of work goes into the Paddock to Reef program about verifying results and about understanding what the actual practice changes were that projector just really can't do. Okay, so the future. You guys all would have noticed, and I pointed it out before, in that this water quality improvement plan is expired now, okay, 2017 to 2022. So what that means is that this document is up for review now. And so the water quality targets, the management practice targets, they're all in a process of under review. The target, so the target that I've been talking about, the 90% adoption of best practice target, it was actually brought forward. So the review of that was brought forward. So you would have noticed or seen, so the report card that was recently released, it didn't report against the management practice targets because officially that target no longer exists. So it was brought forward and it's being reviewed by an independent of Paddock to Reef and government group. So Alluvium Consultancy were the group that were chosen to lead this review. And they've just about a month ago finished all of their running through the catchments, talking about new targets and different practices and all that sort of stuff. They maintain a website here, which they keep updates and that sort of stuff on. So if you're interested in that or getting in contact with them, go to that website, talk to them, that sort of stuff. So they, you know, like I said before, there's some big changes. We've learned a lot. You guys think you hate that 90% adoption target. I can tell you don't hate it anywhere near as much as I do. So I'm really excited about what's coming in the future. So if you keep up to date with it. So yeah, so this here is the targets essentially that sit in the water quality reef water quality improvement plan. So these are all going to be under review. So that 90% adoption of best practice, as I said, under review, and these ones here about the percentage improvement, we'll also get a small review as well. We need to make sure we're still online here. So, gone. And because the water quality risk frameworks exist, their purpose was to define what best practice was, okay? Because that target was about 90% adoption of best practice. These things here aren't relevant to what like they were in the past. Okay, so they will be reviewed and gone, or they'll look very different in the future. So the thing that I'm really excited about going into the future is that there's this chance to update, because we were locked in that 17 to 22 period. We couldn't really update a whole heap of stuff, and we know we had lots of things that were causing us issues. So we've got this opportunity now to really update and really focus in on the things that really matter. Okay, so the things that we know now is that the outcome of the practice is way more important than the practice. So, and what I mean by that is, if you're following 6 easy steps methodology, that's not as important as ensuring that as much of the nitrogen applied is in the plant. That's the thing that reducing the surplus there. So, making sure that the plant has every possible opportunity to take up nitrogen, take up irrigation water, to use the pesticides that are there. They're the things that are really important. The process is less important for us. So we're going to try and move away as much as we can from proxy questions. We have access to data now that we just never had access to, in 2017 or 2013 when the evolution of these questions came through. So because of that, we will move more and more into collecting more actual data. So irrigation water, like, actual megaliters, actual pesticides. So anybody who's worked with the pesticide questions know how rubbish they are and how they just don't tell you the information. Or, projects where we're really working hard to move away from, highly toxic, environmentally toxic pesticides to less toxic pesticides. We just can't, our questions can't capture them at the moment. So there'll be a big move to collecting more actual data. And any other ideas is the thing. Like, we've observed lots of things, but, we're not the ones on the ground asking these questions of growers, getting frustrated when we're not able to represent the things that we are really interested in the questions. So we're really open to ideas and that sort of stuff. And I think that is about me. So I think the next part is you guys firing questions, or we're discussing sort of things. Is that right, Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I just popped a comment in the chat to remind people if they had any questions to raise their hand using the reactions button, or to type a question in the chat. While we're waiting for people who might want to do that, I might actually ask a question, Adam, if that's okay.
Yep.
Going back to the slides on the weightings of the different practices within each of the frameworks, I have had some queries recently, people sort of trying to get their head around not so much the weightings within each framework, but how much each framework separately influences the water quality outcome. So how much within the Burdick, and how strong is the soil management part of the framework versus the nutrient or the pesticide, or say the nutrient framework, in terms of the actual water quality outcome that's sort of achieved when a project's delivered?
Yeah, so they're kind of, in the way that we manage it, they're handled almost separately. So they don't combine like we don't combine the practices and say, oh, because you're a C soil and a C nutrient, you're worse than a C soil and a B nutrient. That's not. So as far as what we do, we don't do that. But when it gets over into the modeling side of things, it does have an impact. I'm not the best person to talk about this because it is outside of my expertise. But essentially, soil management changes the way that water flows through a soil profile on a farm. So practices that improve infiltration mean that you get more of the nutrient or pesticide, whatever, into the soil profile, and less of it is lost through runoff. So, and that's what the model is taking into account those. Now, it's really going to be different in terms of impact on soil management or irrigation management in terms of the nitrogen outcome, soil to soil. So, you know, some soils just run off more. They're a higher clay content. They're less impervious. So you just get a lot more runoff. So, you know, the impact of changing practices that improve infiltration isn't going to have as much impact as it would on a different soil which already had a higher infiltration to start with. So it's not really one size fits all. It's very site specific, and, you know, really linked to the soil type and obviously, you know, climate as well. So the impact in the Burdekin would be very different to the impact in Tully or somewhere like that, where you got more rainfall to deal with.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. So probably also a question more for the modelers as well to sort of help us to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah. Yep. That'd be
Cool.
something that they could cover, and they could show what the model is saying about those different practices.
Sure. Greg Rosado, did you have your hand up before for a question?
Yeah, I did there, Rob. Adam, just asking the question you were just talking about, the more around the outcomes of particular, like fertiliser, you know, around 6 easy steps and all that. You're more concentrating on the outcomes. Will that impact with the NNP budgets? That's an input side of thing. Will we need to continue with those if we're just interested in the outcomes?
Are you talking? Are you talking about like in terms of the regs side of things?
Yeah.
Or yeah, look, I don't know how this will impact on the regs. I really don't know about that. I guess what we're really trying to say is that, you know, having a recipe for how you come up with what you put on is not something that we're overly interested in. What we're really wanting to know is the way that a farm is managed, how much is available there, how much is not in the crop and available to be lost.
Yep.
So that's the thing that we're interested in. And the reason that and the other thing that I like about that is that, me personally, I think there's been too much focus on nitrogen rate. I think that we've kind of missed the point in that we've spent a lot of time talking about nitrogen rate and 6 easy steps and are you doing that and are you doing this, when what we should be looking at is how do we grow bigger crops? Because if we can grow bigger crops, we can mop up that nitrogen. So that it's about what's not in the crop. So a bigger crop needs more nitrogen. So let's look at things that improve will increase the amount there. So, you know, if we can bump the average yield in the Burdekin by 10 tonnes with the same inputs. So if we look at soil management or weed management or irrigation management or whatever it is that are particular, because different farm to farm, right? So best practice on your farm's completely different to best practice on a farm down the road.
Yep.
So, you know, let's look at that sort of stuff and let's go, okay, well, what are the things we can do to get you 10 tonnes or 15 or 20 or, you know, whatever? You might be able to achieve that with some things. Your neighbour might be able to achieve 3 kind of thing. Like it's different everywhere.
Would we be looking then more backwards towards the type of fertiliser we're using? Do we need more research in the fertilisers? Do we need more research in the breeding into those areas that, you know, so the type of fertiliser, the way they work, will get the more of it into the plant, you know, more into that area. You know what I'm saying there, Adam?
Yeah. I know what you're saying. There's a fair bit happening in that, like the EFF space, enhanced efficiency fertilizers. So, you know, if you can delay that nutrient coming out, so it's not all coming out in one go. If it can be metered out, they're hoping that you can get more in, kind of thing. So there is some work happening in that.
Yeah, I was in the EF60 trial. and with Nick from down Mackay there, and Nick Hill, and yeah, so did a fair bit of work around those fertilizers, and from what we gathered, I think there still needs to be more work of how it can be even more delayed as it comes in, maybe even more steps as it feeds into the crop, instead of just because it's still not a long period with the ones we have now, the enhanced efficiency fertilizers.
Yeah, and that's that's the thing. Like, if we can change the conversation away from rate, because we're sort of saying that rate is the king, and it's like, well, it's not. It's about recovery of that, how much we can get into the plant. So we can change the conversation. We start looking at things that different blends, different varieties, the impact of, so a really great example in Mackay, most of the irrigation water isn't allocated. Irrigation water is not used. Like something like 80% of the allocated irrigation water is not used. It's a big push down there to just use some more. So if you can use a couple of meg, you can grow an extra 10, 20 tons with the same inputs. We mopped up a lot of fertilizer there. So let's look at these other things that we can do to get more tons and more cane for the same inputs. So that's, they're the areas that I'm really interested in moving into. So, we're really looking to push this whole area towards, like, let's just get more in there, because it's not rate. It's not all these other things, not these proxy questions about whether you're using 6 easy steps and that sort of stuff. It's about how much is in that plant. And let's get it. And the same thing applies with water, right? Like, we've irrigation projects here. We talk about scheduling, and we talk about this, and we talk about all of this other stuff. What really matters is how much of the irrigation water gets into the plant, because we just don't want it running off, and we don't want it draining. We want it in the plant. We want it doing its job. So these are the things, like, let's move to more sugar or cane or whatever we're going to say, whatever the measure is, because I just see there's a comment here. It should be about sugar per hectare, not cane. Look, you guys know about this stuff more than I do. But, let's talk about more production for the same inputs. Let's not reduce the inputs. Let's get more production, because,
and that may be able to happen off farm, Adam. That's just what I'm saying. We're very concentrated on farm, a little bit around, but there might be something that we're not even using that can be brought into the system. Even just composting more and stuff like that. Having access to compost. Farmers don't have access to build that carbon in the soil, which should help the fertilizers be used more efficiently, shouldn't it? So big hassles with access to things like that. So they're the things I'm talking about.
Well, absolutely. Like, and the thing, for me also is like, and you'll agree with me, like, half an hour ago it was you against me kind of thing. So us against them has got to stop. We need to be more, it's going to be easier for me to convince you to grow 10 tons more than it is to drop your nitrogen rate. So let's be in this together and be, get this, like, production. Let's just talk about production. You got to remember that I'm in DAF, I'm Department of Agriculture. So we're production. We're about making sure that we've got good industries and that sort of stuff. That's why we're part of this Reef program, is that, we need to be making sure we're looking after agriculture and improving production and that sort of stuff. We've been stuck with these really bad targets in the past, which has meant that the way that we've handled everything is really bad. Well, we've discovered that they're really bad. Going forward, new targets, new refocus on everything. Let's talk about the surplus. Let's deal with the stuff that isn't in the plant, and let's work out, can we get more of it into the plant? Let's address constraints on the farm to get more in the plant.
Thanks, Adam. There's no more questions in the chat. I'll just chime in with one more while we see if anyone else has anything to add. You've mentioned briefly sort of upcoming updates of the projector tool. Can you just give us a quick overview of what we can expect with that tool?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So as everybody is acutely aware, in projector, it, you know, you put in, you change a rate and a yield or and sometimes you'll get a change, sometimes you won't. It's not very intuitive to what it's doing. And that's down to link to the way that we have to try and line it up against 6 easy steps. The update that's coming is that we're just going to use a straight NUE calculation, which is about trying to work out surplus. So straight NUE or nitrogen risk calculation. And so that helps to make the change more linear, but we were stuck for a period there also that we only have 6 bands. So we have that A partial B, B partial C, C partial D. So we only have a handful of bands there. So again, and the width of those bands meant there was still a chance to move in there. What we've done is we've done an interpolation process, and increased the amount of bands. So we've gone from 6 bands up to a bit over 20 bands. Now, and so the interpolation process basically says if you've got 2 points, okay, if you've got B and C. So for B and C, we have known, the model tells us B is losing this amount and C is losing that amount. At the moment, everything between B and C is losing the same amount. What we're going to say is if you have gone 75% of the way to C or to B, from C to B, then you should receive 75% of that benefit. So you won't receive all of it because you haven't moved all the way to B, but you should receive 75%. So using that process, we can actually, we don't have to have any bands at all, but what we did was said, let's keep bands in there because it's still a model at the end of the day. So it's still, you know, an estimation. So we're not confident down to single kilo reductions, but, you know, we're happy to say 5 kilo reduction should get a result. So that update has been implemented into the test environment now that I have access to in Projector, and we've run quite a lot of tests on it. So a particular data set we had, I put in 200 projects across all of the catchments. So, you know, Burnett, Mary, you guys, Wet Tropics, Mackay. I went through every single one of those and made sure that there was a change in nutrient management. So the rate changed or the yield went up, something like that. So every single one of those had a change. When I first ran it through, 55% of those projects, so the current system, if I load it up today, 55% of those projects did not generate, their change was not big enough to move from one band to another and get a DIN saving. With the incoming changes, that drops to 10%. So, and of that 10%, you're looking at, you know, they've made a 1 kilo reduction in N rate or things like that. So, you know, 1 kilo is beyond our realms of confidence to say, well, yes, that will have an impact, sort of thing. So that's all been done. Where I'm at the in the moment now is writing up the comms around all of that now. So we've learnt through bitter experience that communication about major updates in Projector need to be considered and need to be done really well. So we're writing the comms up about that now. So we'll have an email go out to all users soon, which will say this is the update, this is what's happening, that sort of stuff. And then there are a lot of comms and you know, we'll run some information sessions and that sort of stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's done, the update's coming. Hopefully everybody will be happy because it does mean that those big jumps are gone. Like if you go from whatever to whatever, you drop 20 kilos, that no longer exists. Anything down to, you know, 3, 4, 5, sort of 4 to 5 kilo reduction should generate a DIN result now. Just need to finish the comms material around it and get it all loaded. So I'm hoping in a few weeks' time it should all be done and approved, and we can, go from there, get it out, get it in people's hands.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Well, there's nothing else in the chat, no hands up, so I guess we might wrap things up. We're pretty much on time, 15 minutes over, which is pretty good. So Adam, thank you very much on behalf of all the participants for providing that that update on the paddock to reef management practice adoption process. Just a couple of notable things. For the next session, we're looking at getting Carl back to provide us with a detailed rundown on the actual report card results for the Burdekin, which I think it'd be really good to have someone actually run through it and explain all of the ins and outs of that latest report card, which was released just a few weeks ago. NQ Dry Tropics will send out a reminder and an invite to the next session, and that's probably going to be the topic of choice. And a reminder to everyone that this recording of this session and a summary, PDF summary, and a copy of Adam's slides will all be up on our NQ Dry Tropics website in the very near future. I'm sort of hoping in sort of 48 hours or so. So keep an eye on that, and we'll send that out when it's up and live. We'll send that out to all of the invitees. So yeah, thank you to everyone for your participation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Adam, thank you very much again, and we'll catch you all next time.
All right, thanks guys.